They fired me in front of 300 shareholders, right after I asked one question too many. I didn't scream, I didn't cry, but the CEO should have because I had the receipts. The room was still vibrating with tension when I stepped into the gleaming elevator of the Grand Peachtree Hotel. My heels clicked against the marble floor, the sound echoing in the suddenly silent space. I could feel 300 pairs of eyes burning into my back as the doors slid closed. Only then did I allow my hands to shake. My name is Claire Donovan. Until exactly 7 minutes ago, I was the senior internal audit analyst at Offshore Industries, one of the largest energy conglomerates in North America. Now I was unemployed, a whistleblower. A target I wasn't sure yet. What I did know was that Gordon Rexley, our silver-haired CEO with his perfect veneers and $10,000 suits, had just made the biggest mistake of his career. I had only asked one question. Where is the Q2 sustainability audit report in the disclosure files legal confirmed receipt 3 weeks ago? Simple, straightforward, career-ending, apparently. The shareholders' meeting had been proceeding with the usual self-congratulatory drone. Rexley stood at the podium, his voice booming through the ballroom as he highlighted Helixor's unprecedented commitment to green initiatives and industry-leading carbon offset programs. The same corporate platitudes that filled our press releases and investor packets. When he opened the floor for questions, I raised my hand. I wasn't even planning to speak initially after all. I was just an analyst, not a director or VP. But something about the missing report had been gnawing at me for weeks. My team had worked overtime to complete that audit. We'd found discrepancies, significant ones. And now the report had vanished from the official disclosure package. Ms. Donovan, Rexley had said, his smile not quite reaching his eyes. You have a question. When I asked about the missing report, the room temperature seemed to drop 10 degrees. Rexley's face hardened, though he maintained that practiced smile. Claire, he'd said, using my first name deliberately. This is hardly the forum for administrative details. If you have concerns about documentation, please follow proper channels through your department head. I did, I replied, standing my ground. 3 times. The report is still missing from disclosures. That's when Marcus Whitley, our CFO, leaned over and whispered something in Rexley's ear. Rexley nodded almost imperceptibly. Ladies and gentlemen, Rexley addressed the room, his voice honey-smooth again. It seems we have an internal matter that requires immediate attention. Ms. Donovan, you are hereby terminated from Helixor Industries, effective immediately. Security will escort you from the premises. Just like that, 15 years of dedicated service ended with a sentence. As I gathered my belongings, not a single colleague made eye contact. Not Diane from risk management, who had been at my wedding. Not Tim from compliance, who'd been my mentor for years. Not even Zoe, my own team member who I'd championed for promotion last quarter. They all became suddenly fascinated with their notepads or phones. Now, as the elevator descended to the hotel lobby, I took a deep breath and straightened my spine. I would not give them the satisfaction of seeing me broken. I stepped out into the lobby, my composure intact, and headed for the exit. Ms. Donovan, a moment, please. I turned to see an older gentleman hurrying toward me. I recognized him immediately, Raymond Kessler, founder of Kessler Capital and one of Helixor's largest individual investors. He was in his early 70s, with a shock of white hair and sharp blue eyes that belied his age. That question you asked, he said without preamble. Would you mind repeating it for me? I studied him carefully. Was this a trap? Some attempt by the board to gather more evidence against me. I simply asked where the Q2 sustainability audit report was. I said finally. It was submitted for disclosure, but appears to have been removed from the final package. Kessler's eyes narrowed. And you're certain this report was completed and submitted? Absolutely. I supervised the audit myself. Legal confirmed receipt on May 17th. He pulled out a business card and pressed it into my hand. Call me tomorrow. Don't discuss this with anyone else in the meantime. Before I could respond, he was gone, disappearing back toward the elevator bank. I looked down at the heavyweight cardstock in my hand. It contained only his name and a phone number. No company information, no email, old school. I slipped the card into my pocket and stepped outside into the Atlanta heat. It was only 11:30 a.m. I'd woken up this morning with a job, a career path, and a 401k that Helixor matched at an industry-leading 8%. Now I had. What exactly? A reputation for being disruptive, a potential lawsuit for wrongful termination. And yet, beneath the shock and anger, I felt something else stirring determination. They had silenced me in that room, but they hadn't silenced what I knew. I flagged down a taxi. Where to? The driver asked. For a moment, I hesitated. The logical destination was Helixor's headquarters to collect my personal items. But something told me that bridge was already burned. Home, I said finally. I need to get home. My apartment felt different in the middle of a workday, too quiet, too empty. Like I was trespassing in my own space. I kicked off my heels and headed straight for my laptop. My first instinct was to log into my work email, to download any files I might need, to preserve evidence. But when I tried to access the Helixor system, I was met with a stark message. Access denied, user account disabled. Please contact system administrator. They'd moved fast, very fast. I tried our project management system, our cloud storage, even the HR portal where I could view my benefits information. All access revoked. I leaned back in my chair, running my hands through my hair. Of course they'd cut me off immediately. Standard procedure for terminated employees, especially ones who asked inconvenient questions in front of shareholders. My personal phone buzzed with a text from Zoe. Claire, I'm so sorry. Are you okay? I wanted to say something, but it happened so fast. I stared at the message for a long moment before putting the phone down without replying. I needed to think before engaging with anyone from Helixor, even someone I considered a friend. Instead, I walked to my bedroom closet and reached for the highest shelf. Behind a stack of winter sweaters sat a dusty external hard drive that I hadn't touched in years. Back when I'd first moved from financial reporting to internal audit, I'd been paranoid about losing data during the transition. I'd made personal backups of everything I was working on, a practice that was technically against company policy, but one that many of us engaged in nevertheless. I connected the drive to my laptop and held my breath as it whirred to life. Would it even work after all this time? The blue light blinked, and after a moment, the drive's contents appeared on my screen. 4 years of reports, spreadsheets, emails, and presentations. Most of it mundane, routine. But somewhere in this digital archive might be the thread that, when pulled, would unravel whatever Rexley was trying to hide. I started organizing the files methodically, creating a folder structure to help me navigate the massive amount of data. As I worked, my mind kept returning to the sustainability audit. What had we found that was so damning it needed to disappear? The audit had been routine, part of Helixor's much-publicized commitment to environmental responsibility. We'd examined carbon offset purchases, renewable energy investments, and emissions reduction initiatives. Nothing had seemed catastrophically out of order at the time, some inconsistencies in the carbon credit documentation. A few offshore transactions that lacked detailed backup, but nothing that had raised immediate red flags. Or had I missed something? Had my team uncovered something more significant than we realized? As I pondered this, my email pinged. A new message from an address I didn't recognize, Prometheus, a Proton mail. Com. The subject line read simply, "You asked the right question." My cursor hovered over the message. It could be malware, a phishing attempt, but my instincts told me otherwise. I clicked. There was no text in the body of the email, just an attachment, a screenshot showing an internal Helixor messaging thread. I recognized the participants, Rexley, Whitley, and Jordan Pierce, our general counsel. The messages were dated just 2 days after my team had submitted the sustainability audit. Whitley, Donovan's team flagged the Norquest transactions. Recommend we hold the report for further review. Pierce, the report's already been logged for disclosure. We can't just hold it. Rexley, find a way. Bury it in legal review if you have to. This can't go public. I stared at the screenshot, my heart racing. Norquest? That name was familiar. Norquest Logistics, an overseas partner that supposedly handled carbon offset projects in Southeast Asia. We'd noted some unusual payment structures, but Pierce's team had provided documentation that seemed legitimate at the time. I scrolled down to see if there was more to the email, but that was it. Just the screenshot and no indication of who Prometheus might be. I hit reply. Who is this? How did you get this information? The response came almost immediately. Someone who knows what they're hiding. Check the Vault cold server. Your old credentials should still work. They forgot about the archives. Vault cold? I hadn't thought about that system in years. It was an old cold storage server that IT had set up back before we migrated to cloud solutions. As far as I knew, it had been decommissioned. I opened a VPN and tried to access the server using my old login from when I'd worked in financial reporting. To my surprise, the credentials worked. I was in. The interface was archaic compared to our current systems, but the data was there, years of backups that apparently no one had bothered to fully decommission or migrate. I navigated to the most recent files and found a folder labeled Sustainability 2025-Q2. Inside was our original audit report, complete and unredacted, along with all the supporting documentation. I downloaded everything, my pulse quickening as I realized what I now possessed. As I began to review the files more carefully, patterns emerged that I hadn't connected before. Norquest Logistics appeared repeatedly, always in connection with large carbon offset purchases. The documentation looked legitimate on the surface, but now that I was looking more closely, I noticed discrepancies in the timestamps, inconsistencies in the project descriptions. I opened another file, a spreadsheet tracking payments to offset providers. Norquest had received over $40 million in the past 18 months alone, far more than any other partner. Another email arrived from Prometheus. Look at the corporate registry in the Cayman Islands. Norquest is a shell. Who owns it? I spent the next hour researching Norquest Logistics, digging through public records in various jurisdictions. The company was indeed registered in the Cayman Islands, with a Byzantine ownership structure that led through several other shell companies. But at the end of the trail was a holding company called Rexwood Partners. Rex, Wood, Rexley, Whitley. Oh my God, I whispered to the empty room. Our CEO and CFO had created an elaborate offshore scheme to funnel money through fake carbon offset projects. Helixer wasn't investing in sustainability at all. It was engaging in greenwashing on a massive scale, with executives pocketing the difference. No wonder they wanted that report buried. No wonder they'd fired me on the spot. I now had a choice to make. I could take this information to the authorities, the SEC. Perhaps I could contact a journalist. I could call Raymond Kessler. Or I could walk away, find a new job, rebuild my career elsewhere, and pretend I'd never seen any of this. But as I stared at my screen, at the evidence of such brazen corruption, I knew I couldn't stay silent. Not when I had the receipts. I picked up Raymond Kessler's card and reached for my phone. This is not just about false environmental claims, Kessler said, leaning forward in his chair. This is securities fraud. We were sitting in a private room at a small restaurant in Buckhead, well away from downtown where Helixer's headquarters dominated the skyline. Kessler had insisted on meeting in person rather than discussing anything over the phone. If what you found is accurate, he continued, they've been misleading investors about fundamental business practices. That's exactly the kind of thing that triggers SEC investigations and shareholder lawsuits. I nodded, pushing my barely touched salad around the plate. I have the evidence, but they've already started a smear campaign. My former colleague texted me that HR is telling everyone I was on probation for erratic behavior. They're laying groundwork to discredit me. Kessler's expression darkened. Classic playbook, destroy the messenger when you can't refute the message. He took a sip of water. What do you want out of this, Ms. Donovan? The question caught me off guard. What do I want? Yes, revenge, justice, money, a new job. Understanding your motivation helps me determine how I can assist you. I considered the question carefully. I want accountability. These people are defrauding investors and lying about environmental initiatives that actually matter. And yes, I admitted, part of me wants vindication. They humiliated me in front of the entire financial community. Kessler nodded. Accountability I can help with. My fund owns nearly 7% of Helixer, and I have relationships with other major shareholders. But we need to be strategic. If we move too quickly, they'll have time to cover their tracks, destroy evidence, create plausible explanations. What do you suggest? First, we need more evidence. The connection to Norquest is damning, but they could claim ignorance of the ownership structure. We need communications showing they knowingly created this scheme. He paused. Do you have allies inside Helixer, anyone who might help? I thought about my colleagues who had averted their eyes as I was escorted out. I'm not sure anymore. Everyone seemed pretty quick to distance themselves. Fear is a powerful motivator, Kessler said. But so is moral outrage. Someone sent you that screenshot. Someone wants this exposed. As if on cue, my phone buzzed with an email notification. Another message from Prometheus. Check your home mailbox. I excused myself and stepped outside the restaurant, calling my neighbor who had a spare key to my apartment building. She confirmed there was indeed a package in my mailbox, a padded envelope with no return address. I need to go, I told Kessler when I returned to the table. I may have received more evidence. He nodded. Be careful. Ms. Donovan. Corporate espionage isn't just in movies. Use secure communications. Don't store sensitive files in the cloud, and watch for surveillance. These people have millions of reasons to stop you. His words sent a chill through me. Until that moment, I hadn't fully considered the potential danger of what I was doing. Here's what we'll do. Kessler continued, passing me a new card with a different phone number. This is a secure line. Call me in 2 days. By then, I'll have spoken with some other major shareholders. We'll need their support to force a board meeting. I slipped the card into my pocket. Thank you, Mr. Kessler. Raymond, please, and don't thank me yet. This won't be easy, and it won't be quick. Are you prepared for what might come? Legal threats, personal attacks, financial pressure. I thought about the missing report, about Rexley's smug face as he terminated me, about the millions diverted from actual environmental initiatives into offshore accounts. Yes, I said firmly, I'm prepared. The package in my mailbox contained a USB drive and a handwritten note that said simply, "The green folder is what matters." No signature, no explanation. I approached the drive with caution, using an old laptop that contained nothing of value in case the USB carried malware. But when I plugged it in, I found only a collection of folders containing what appeared to be internal Helixer documents, emails, meeting minutes, financial records. The green folder, as promised, contained the most damning evidence yet, a series of emails between Rexley, Whitley, and a lawyer in the Cayman Islands, explicitly discussing the creation of Norquest Logistics as a vehicle for redirecting sustainability funds with minimal oversight. There were spreadsheets tracking the division of proceeds, offshore account numbers, everything needed to prove intentional fraud. I spent hours combing through the files, building a chronology of the scheme. It had started small 3 years ago, with just a few million diverted. But as Helixer faced increasing pressure from investors to demonstrate environmental commitment, the executives had expanded the operation. Now it encompassed dozens of fake projects across Southeast Asia and Africa, with over $120 million funneled through shell companies in the past year alone. As I worked, more anonymous tips arrived, some via email, others through encrypted messaging apps I'd never used before. Someone from data analytics sent charts showing the growth of sustainability investments that never reached their stated destinations. Someone from finance provided bank transfer records showing the money trail to private accounts. Someone from legal shared memos revealing the carefully constructed facade of legitimacy that Pierce had created around the fake initiatives. I was building a case, piece by piece, with help from an invisible network of allies within Helixor. People who had remained silent when I was fired, but who were now, in their own ways, fighting back against the corruption. Meanwhile, Helixor was escalating its campaign against me. Zoe texted again, this time to warn me that HR was telling employees I had a history of mental health issues that had affected my judgment. A former colleague called to say they'd been asked to provide examples of inappropriate behavior from me, with the implication that cooperation would be rewarded. Someone from the PR department leaked to an industry blog that I had been terminated for attempting to manipulate audit findings for personal gain. I documented each attack meticulously, adding to a file I labeled Disinfo Tracker. If they wanted to play dirty, I would have evidence of that too. 2 days after my lunch with Kessler, I called the secure number he'd given me. I've spoken with investors representing about 22% of Helixor's shares, he told me without preamble. They're concerned but cautious. They want more than circumstantial evidence before they'll act against Rexley. The board is still firmly in his pocket. I have more than circumstantial evidence now, I replied, and explained about the USB drive and the ongoing information I was receiving. That changes things, Kessler said. We need to move carefully but decisively. The quarterly earnings call is in 3 weeks. That gives us a deadline and a potential forum. What are you thinking? We need to force them to address this publicly, in a setting where they can't control the narrative. But first, we need to ensure the evidence is secure and authenticated. Can you prepare a comprehensive file? Something irrefutable. I'm already working on it. Good. And Claire? You should consider legal representation. When this breaks, Helixor will come at you with everything they have. After the call, I sat at my kitchen table, staring at my reflection in the darkened window. 3 weeks to prepare the case that would likely define the rest of my career and perhaps the rest of my life. I opened my laptop and created a new document. At the top, I typed Helixor Industries, the Norquest Deception. Then I began to write. The next 3 weeks were the most intense of my professional life. I worked 18-hour days, organizing evidence, creating timelines, building financial models that demonstrated the scope of the fraud. I cross-referenced data points, verified sources, and created visual aids that made the complex scheme understandable to non-experts. Meanwhile, my anonymous network continued to provide new information. I still didn't know who Prometheus was, but I had begun to suspect it might be someone fairly senior within Helixor. The breadth and depth of the documents suggested access that most employees wouldn't have. Kessler arranged for me to meet with a prominent securities attorney, Eleanor Walsh, who specialized in whistleblower cases. She reviewed my evidence and agreed to represent me, explaining the protections I might be entitled to under various whistleblower statutes. This is one of the most comprehensive cases I've seen, she told me, looking impressed as she flipped through my documentation. But you should be prepared for significant blowback. Companies like Helixor don't go down without a fight. I'm already experiencing the blowback, I replied, showing her the growing Disinfo Tracker file. They've moved from questioning my competence to suggesting I stole company data to implying I had inappropriate relationships with colleagues. Walsh's expression hardened. Document everything, every communication, every rumor that gets back to you. That kind of retaliatory behavior strengthens our position. As the earnings call approached, I finalized my evidence package, a comprehensive digital file containing all the documents, emails, financial records, and analysis I had compiled. I created multiple backups, storing them in different secure locations as Kessler had advised. The night before the call, I received one final message from Prometheus. Tomorrow changes everything. You're not alone. Attached was a list of questions that various institutional investors planned to ask during the earnings call, questions specifically designed to force Rexley and Whitley to address the sustainability program and the missing audit report. Someone had been coordinating with major shareholders behind the scenes. Someone with influence. Could it be Kessler himself? I'd assumed he was just one concerned investor. But perhaps he was orchestrating a larger movement. Or maybe Prometheus was someone on the board. someone who had finally seen enough of Rexley's corruption. Whoever it was, they were right about one thing: tomorrow would change everything. I didn't have access to the earnings call directly. It was restricted to analysts, investors, and Helixor executives, but Kessler had arranged for me to listen in via a conference line. I sat in Eleanor Walsh's office, notepad ready, as the call began with the usual corporate pleasantries. Rexley's voice was confident as he highlighted Helixor's strong quarter and continued leadership in sustainable energy practices. He mentioned record investment in carbon offset projects and unprecedented progress toward the company's net zero emissions goal. The hypocrisy made my stomach turn. When the call opened for questions, the first few were standard analyst inquiries about revenue projections and market expansion. But then came a question from a representative of BlackRock. Can you provide more detail on the $43 million allocated to carbon offset projects in Southeast Asia this quarter? Specifically, which verification bodies have certified these projects? Rexley's response was smooth but vague, talking about industry standard verification and comprehensive documentation without naming specific entities. Next came a question from Vanguard about the sustainability audit process, followed by one from State Street regarding offshore partners. Each question circled closer to the heart of the fraud, without directly accusing Helixor of wrongdoing. Then Raymond Kessler's distinctive voice came through the line. Mr. Rexley, I'm looking at your recent sustainability disclosures, and I noticed the Q2 internal audit report is not included. Can you explain why this document is missing, particularly given that your former senior internal audit analyst, Claire Donovan, specifically flagged its absence before her abrupt termination? A heavy silence fell over the call. I could almost picture Rexley and Whitley exchanging panicked glances. Mr. Kessler. Rexley finally responded, his voice noticeably tighter. As I'm sure you understand, personnel matters are confidential. Regarding the audit report, there were some technical issues with the document that required further review. We expect to include an updated version in our next disclosure package. Technical issues, Kessler repeated slowly. Would these technical issues have anything to do with Norquest Logistics and its connection to Rexwood Partners? Another silence. Longer this time. When Rexley spoke again, his voice had lost all its practiced charm. I'm not familiar with the details you're referring to. Perhaps we should take this discussion offline. I think not, Kessler replied. In fact, I believe this is precisely the kind of matter that should be discussed openly, given its material impact on Helixor's financial statements and representations to investors. The call moderator tried to move on to the next question, but the damage was done. Analysts began pressing for clarification about Norquest, about verification processes, about the specific projects supposedly being funded in Southeast Asia. Whitley attempted to deflect, claiming that proprietary business relationships prevented them from disclosing certain details. Pierce jumped in with legal jargon about confidentiality agreements and competitive information. But the questions kept coming. It was as if a dam had broken. Finally, an analyst from J.P. Morgan asked the most direct question yet. Is Helixor prepared to address reports that Norquest Logistics is a shell company with direct ties to Helixor executives, specifically through Rexwood Partners? Rexley abruptly ended the call, citing time constraints and promising to follow up individually with analysts who had outstanding questions. Eleanor Walsh looked at me with raised eyebrows. They're scrambling, she said. Now we move to Phase 2. Phase 2, as Kessler and Walsh had outlined it, was the public release of evidence. Within an hour of the earnings call, Walsh sent a carefully prepared package to the Securities and Exchange Commission, formally filing a whistleblower complaint. Simultaneously, Kessler distributed a letter to all major Helixor shareholders, outlining the evidence and calling for an emergency board meeting. And I made my own move. I had prepared a secure file containing key documents, not everything, but enough to establish the pattern of fraud, and sent it to selected financial journalists who covered the energy sector. By the end of the day, the story had broken. Helixor accused of massive greenwashing scheme read the headline on Bloomberg. Energy giants executives linked to offshore fraud, declared the Wall Street Journal. Helixer's stock plummeted in after-hours trading. That evening, I received a cease and desist letter from Helixer's legal department, demanding I stop making false and defamatory statements and return all stolen company property. The letter was addressed to Clarice Donovan, a telling error that suggested just how chaotic things had become inside Helixer's executive offices. I forwarded the letter to Walsh without comment. We had anticipated this response and were prepared for it. What I hadn't anticipated was the call from Prometheus. After weeks of anonymous messages, a voice finally came through on a secure calling app I'd downloaded at their suggestion. "Claire, are you somewhere secure?" The voice was familiar but distorted through what I assumed was voice-changing software. "Yes," I replied. "Who is this?" "That doesn't matter right now. What matters is that Rexley is destroying evidence. He's ordered IT to purge the servers, including Vault Cold. Whatever you haven't already downloaded will be gone by morning." My mind raced. I had comprehensive evidence of the Norquest scheme, but there were other aspects of Helixer's operations I hadn't fully explored yet. The sustainability fraud might just be the tip of the iceberg. "Why are you helping me?" I asked. A pause. "Because what they're doing is wrong, and because what they did to you was wrong. Not everyone at Helixer is corrupt. Claire, some of us have been waiting for a chance to clean house. Are you on the board?" Another pause. "I can't say more, but there's a secure FTP site I've set up. I'm texting you the credentials now. Download everything you can before it's gone." The call ended, and moments later, my phone buzzed with a text containing a URL, username, and password. I spent the next several hours downloading gigabytes of internal Helixer documents, far more than I had accessed previously. Financial records, board minutes, executive communications. Everything I would need to understand the full scope of the corruption. As I worked, news alerts kept popping up on my phone. Financial analysts were downgrading Helixer stock. Institutional investors were issuing statements of concern. Environmental groups were calling for investigations into Helixer's other sustainability claims. The pressure was building, and somewhere in Helixer's gleaming downtown headquarters, Gordon Rexley was watching his carefully constructed empire begin to crumble. The emergency board meeting was called for Friday morning, just 3 days after the earnings call. Kessler kept me updated on the behind-the-scenes maneuvering, alliances forming, factions emerging, proxies being counted. The board was divided, with some directors still loyal to Rexley while others were demanding answers. Meanwhile, I continued to analyze the new data from the FTP site, discovering that the Norquest scheme was indeed just one component of a larger pattern of financial manipulation. Rexley and his inner circle had been engaging in various forms of accounting fraud for years, using sustainability initiatives as cover for their activities because those programs had less established oversight. On Thursday afternoon, I received a surprising request. The board wanted me to attend the emergency meeting. "It's unusual," Kessler admitted when he called to discuss it. "But several directors specifically asked for you to be present to answer questions directly. Would you be willing to do that?" I hesitated. The thought of facing Rexley and Whitley again, of walking into the Helixer boardroom as a whistleblower rather than an employee, was intimidating. But it was also an opportunity I couldn't pass up. "Yes," I said, "I'll be there." Walsh insisted on accompanying me, of course. "You don't say anything without my approval," she warned, "no matter how they try to provoke you." The meeting was set for 9 a.m. at Helixer's headquarters. As my taxi approached the familiar building the next morning, I felt a strange mix of emotions, anxiety, certainly, but also a kind of grim satisfaction. I had spent 15 years in that building, working my way up from junior analyst to a senior position. Now I was returning as something else entirely. Security had clearly been instructed to expect us. We were issued visitor badges and escorted directly to the executive floor, where the boardroom occupied the corner with the best views of the city. The room fell silent as we entered. 16 people sat around the massive oak table, the 12 board members, Rexley, Whitley, Pierce, and a woman I recognized as Catherine Mercer, Helixor's chief sustainability officer. Conspicuously absent was Jordan Pierce, the general counsel who had been involved in burying the audit report. Rexley's face was a mask of cold fury. Whitley looked pale and drawn. Most of the board members regarded me with expressions ranging from curiosity to open hostility. But one face stood out: Patricia Winters, the board's most recent addition and the former CEO of a major tech company. She was watching me with an expression I couldn't quite read: interest, respect, calculation. Ms. Donovan, began Frederick Hamilton, the board chairman. Thank you for joining us today. This is an unusual situation, but given the serious nature of the allegations you've made, the board felt it appropriate to hear directly from you. Walsh placed a hand on my arm, a silent reminder to let her speak first. My client is here as a courtesy, she said. But I want to be clear that she is a protected whistleblower who has filed a formal complaint with the SEC. Any attempts to intimidate or discredit her could constitute additional violations of securities law. No one is attempting to intimidate anyone, Hamilton replied smoothly. We simply want clarification on certain matters. What followed was 3 hours of intense questioning. Board members asked about the audit report, about how I had discovered the Norquest connection, about the evidence supporting my allegations. Walsh managed the discussion carefully, allowing me to answer factual questions while blocking anything that seemed designed to trap or implicate me. Rexley spoke only once. When a board member asked about Rexwood Partners, "This is absurd. I have no connection to Norquest Logistics or any offshore entity. Ms. Donovan has fabricated this entire conspiracy as revenge for her justified termination." I started to respond, but Walsh touched my arm again. Instead, she opened her briefcase and withdrew a document. This is a corporate registration document for Rexwood Partners filed in the British Virgin Islands, she said, sliding it across the table. Note the beneficial owners listed on page 3. The room fell silent as Hamilton examined the document, then passed it to his left. It made its way around the table, each board member's expression growing grimmer as they read. This appears to show that Rexwood Partners is indeed owned by trusts benefiting Mr. Rexley and Mr. Whitley. Hamilton said finally, Mr. Rexley, would you care to explain? Rexley's face had gone from red to ashen. This is I need to consult with counsel before responding further. I imagine you do, Patricia Winters said, speaking for the first time. She turned to me. Ms. Donovan, in your analysis of Helixor's sustainability programs, did you find any legitimate environmental initiatives, or was the entire program fraudulent? It was an excellent question, one that cut to the heart of the matter. There are legitimate components, I answered carefully. The domestic renewable energy investments appear genuine, as do the reforestation projects in North America. The fraud is concentrated in the international carbon offset programs, particularly those in regions with limited oversight. Winters nodded thoughtfully. So approximately what percentage of our claimed sustainability spending is actual versus fraudulent? Based on my analysis, about 40% is legitimate. The remaining 60%, roughly $120 million in the past year, was diverted through schemes like Norquest. A murmur ran through the room. One board member, a retired energy executive named James Lowell, shook his head in disgust. If these allegations are proven true, this represents a fundamental breach of fiduciary duty and a violation of everything this company claims to stand for. Catherine Mercer, the sustainability officer, looked close to tears. I was told the verification documents for these projects were confidential but legitimate. I've been reporting progress on initiatives that apparently don't even exist. You were misled, Catherine, I said, forgetting Walsh's caution in the face of Mercer's obvious distress. Many people were. Hamilton called for a brief recess. As board members filed out, presumably to confer privately, Walsh leaned close to me. This is going better than I expected, she whispered. Several of them clearly had no idea about the fraud. That works in our favor. When the meeting reconvened 30 minutes later, the atmosphere had shifted noticeably. Hamilton's expression was grave as he addressed the room. In light of the evidence presented today, and pending a full investigation, the board has taken a preliminary vote, effective immediately. Gordon Rexley and Marcus Whitley are suspended from their duties as CEO and CFO of Helixer Industries. Patricia Winters will serve as interim CEO while an independent investigation is conducted. Rexley shot to his feet. "This is outrageous. You can't." "It's done." "Gordon," Hamilton interrupted. "Security is waiting to escort you and Marcus from the building. Your access to all company systems has already been revoked." As Rexley and Whitley were led out, both men glaring daggers at me, Hamilton continued, "Ms. Donovan, while we cannot comment on your termination at this time, the board acknowledges the service you have rendered in bringing these matters to light. We would like to request your continued cooperation with the independent investigators we'll be appointing." "My client is willing to cooperate fully," Walsh replied before I could speak. With appropriate protections and acknowledgments of her whistleblower status, the meeting concluded shortly thereafter. As we gathered our materials to leave, Patricia Winters approached us. "Ms. Donovan," she said quietly, "I'd like to speak with you privately, if you're willing. Not today, things are too chaotic, but perhaps early next week." I glanced at Walsh, who gave a small nod. "I'd be open to that," I replied. Winters handed me her card. "Excellent. I'll have my assistant arrange it." She hesitated, then added, "What you did took extraordinary courage. Not everyone would have risked their career to expose this kind of corruption." As she walked away, I wondered about her interest. Was she simply gathering information as the interim CEO? Or did she have another agenda? Outside Helixer's headquarters, the media had gathered word of the emergency board meeting had leaked. Walsh steered me toward a waiting car, deflecting questions with practiced ease. As we pulled away from the curb, I caught a final glimpse of the Helixer logo gleaming on the building facade. Just 3 weeks ago, I had walked through those doors as a trusted employee. Now I was something else entirely, a whistleblower who had brought one of the country's largest energy companies to its knees. The realization was both terrifying and exhilarating. The next week passed in a blur of meetings with SEC investigators, interviews with Helixer's newly appointed independent counsel, and consultations with Walsh about next steps. The story had exploded in the financial press, with new details emerging daily as more Helixer employees came forward with information. Norquest Logistics was just the beginning. Investigators uncovered a network of shell companies and fraudulent partners that Rexley and his allies had used to siphon funds from various corporate initiatives. The sustainability program had been the largest target, but not the only one. On Wednesday morning, I met with Patricia Winters at a quiet cafe near Piedmont Park. She arrived alone, dressed more casually than she had been at the board meeting, but still exuding the quiet authority that had marked her corporate career. "Thank you for meeting me," she said as she slid into the booth across from me. "I wanted to talk to you away from lawyers and board members and all the corporate machinery." I was instantly on guard. "What about the future?" she replied simply. "Helixer's, and perhaps yours as well." She explained that the board had authorized a complete overhaul of the company's governance and compliance structures. New systems would be implemented, new checks and balances established, new leadership installed. "The challenge," she continued, "is rebuilding trust with investors, with regulators, with employees, and with the public. We need to demonstrate not just that we've removed the bad actors, but that we've fundamentally changed how we operate." I nodded, unsure where she was going with this. As part of that change, the board is establishing an independent ethics and compliance committee with significant oversight powers. It will operate separately from management, reporting directly to the board with the authority to review any aspect of Helixer's operations. "That sounds like a positive step," I said cautiously. "It is, and we'd like you to chair it." I stared at her, certain I'd misheard. "You want me to what?" "Chair the Ethics and Compliance Committee," she repeated. "Initially on a rotating basis, as we establish the structure and parameters. Eventually, it would become a permanent executive position, chief ethics officer, or something similar." I was speechless. Of all the possible outcomes I had imagined, this had never crossed my mind. Ms. Winters. Patricia, please. Patricia. I appreciate the offer. But I'm the whistleblower who just exposed massive fraud at your company. Half your employees probably consider me a traitor. The other half don't know whether to fear me or thank me. How could I possibly be effective in such a role? She smiled slightly. Those are precisely the qualities that make you perfect for it. You've demonstrated integrity in the face of significant personal risk. You've shown a commitment to transparency and accountability that's rare in corporate America. And yes, some people will resent you. Others will respect you. Either way, everyone will know that you can't be intimidated or co-opted. I took a sip of my coffee, using the moment to gather my thoughts. What about the legal issues, my whistleblower complaint, the ongoing investigations? We've discussed this with counsel. There's no legal impediment to hiring you in this role. In fact, it would be seen as a positive step by regulators, evidence that we're serious about reform. She leaned forward. Claire, this isn't just about making amends to you, though you certainly deserve that. It's about leveraging your unique perspective and credibility to help rebuild Offshore as a company that actually lives up to its stated values. I need time to think about this, I said finally. Of course, talk to your attorney. Consider all angles, but I hope you'll say yes. She slid a folder across the table. Here's the formal proposal, including compensation details and reporting structure. Take your time reviewing it. As she stood to leave, she added one more thing. By the way, we found Prometheus. My heart skipped. Who? Jordan Pierce, our former general counsel. Apparently, he'd been keeping records of everything as a form of insurance. But when he saw what happened to you at the shareholders' meeting, something snapped. He was the one who sent you the initial screenshot and helped coordinate the flow of information afterward. I was stunned. Pierce had always seemed like Rexley's loyal lieutenant. Why would he risk his career like that? His wife is an environmental scientist, works on climate impact assessment. According to Pierce, he'd justified the legal maneuvering as just part of the job, until he realized how Rexley was using him to facilitate actual fraud. He couldn't face her knowing what he'd been part of. She shrugged. People are complicated. After she left, I sat for a long time, staring at the unopened folder. Chief Ethics Officer at Offshore Industries. The company that had fired me in front of 300 shareholders just a month ago now wanted me to oversee its ethical practices. The irony was almost too much to process. When I finally opened the folder and saw the proposed compensation package, I nearly choked on my coffee. It was more than double my previous salary, with stock options and performance incentives tied to successfully implementing the new compliance framework. Was this a genuine opportunity for meaningful change? Or was it just a sophisticated form of damage control, hiring the whistleblower to neutralize the threat and present a reformed image to the world? I called Walsh to discuss the offer. Her initial reaction was cautious. It's unusual, she admitted, but not unprecedented. Companies in crisis sometimes make bold moves to signal change. The question is whether they're sincere about giving you real authority or just using you as window dressing. What about the whistleblower complaint? Would accepting this position affect that process? Not necessarily. The SEC investigation will proceed regardless. Your cooperation with authorities wouldn't change. But yes, it would complicate the narrative somewhat. I spent the next few days wrestling with the decision, making lists of pros and cons, talking through scenarios with Walsh. I even called Raymond Kessler for his perspective. They need you more than you need them, he said bluntly. If you take this position, do it on your terms. Demand the authority and independence to make real changes. Otherwise, walk away. In the end, I scheduled another meeting with Patricia Winters, this time at Offshore headquarters. I had made my decision, but I needed to look her in the eye when I delivered it. I'll accept the position, I told her, under 3 non-negotiable conditions. She nodded, unsurprised. Go on. First, the Ethics and Compliance Committee must have veto power over any major corporate initiative, particularly those involving environmental claims or offshore partnerships. That's ambitious, but I think the board will agree given the circumstances. Second, I want a public acknowledgement of wrongful termination and a retraction of all statements questioning my competence or integrity. Already in process, she assured me. Our PR team is drafting a statement. And third, I continued, I want to bring in my own team. People I trust who can help implement the new compliance framework without being influenced by existing corporate relationships. This gave her pause. That's potentially disruptive. How many people are we talking about? Initially, just 3 or 4 key positions. Over time, we'd integrate with existing departments rather than creating a parallel structure. She considered this for a moment, then nodded. I'll present these conditions to the board, but I believe they'll be accepted. They understand the stakes. 2 weeks later, I walked back into Helixer headquarters not as a visitor or whistleblower, but as the inaugural chair of the Ethics and Compliance Committee and special advisor to the board. My first official act was to meet with the sustainability team to begin a comprehensive review of all environmental initiatives. Catherine Mercer, still serving as Chief Sustainability Officer, greeted me with unexpected warmth. I've been hoping for an opportunity to thank you, she said. What Rexley was doing, it made a mockery of everything we claim to stand for. I should have asked more questions, demanded more verification. We all should have, I acknowledged. The system was designed to compartmentalize information, to keep people from seeing the complete picture. That's what we're going to change. Over the following months, we did exactly that. We implemented new validation protocols for all sustainability projects, requiring independent third-party verification before funds could be dispersed. We established direct reporting lines between project managers and the ethics committee, bypassing the executive layer that had previously filtered all information. We created anonymized channels for employees to raise concerns without fear of retaliation. The road wasn't always smooth. Some longtime Helixer executives resisted the new oversight, arguing that it slowed decision-making and hampered competitiveness. A few resigned rather than adapt to the new reality. Others tried to undermine the changes through passive resistance or malicious compliance. But with the board's backing and particularly Patricia Winters' unwavering support, we gradually transformed Helixer's corporate culture. Transparency became a core value, not just in external communications, but in internal processes as well. 6 months after my return, the SEC announced the conclusion of its investigation. Rexley and Whitley faced civil charges for securities fraud, with criminal investigations still ongoing. Helixer itself received a substantial fine, but avoided the most severe penalties due to its cooperation and comprehensive reforms. At the next shareholders' meeting held in the same hotel ballroom where I had been publicly fired, I presented the Ethics Committee's first annual report. As I stood at the podium, looking out at the sea of faces, I couldn't help but reflect on the journey that had brought me back to this room. A year ago, I began. I asked a simple question about a missing audit report. That question led to the exposure of significant fraud and the beginning of Helixer's transformation. Today, I'm here to report on that transformation, not just what we've done, but what we've learned. I outlined the new compliance framework, the revised sustainability program, and the metrics we'd established to measure ethical performance alongside financial results. The most important change, I continued, isn't in our policies or procedures, it's in our culture. We're building a company where asking difficult questions isn't career-ending, it's career-defining. Where transparency isn't just a buzzword in press releases but a daily practice. Where doing the right thing matters more than doing the expedient thing. After my presentation, Raymond Kessler approached me, a smile crinkling the corners of his eyes. Quite a different reception this time, he observed. I laughed. Just a bit. You've accomplished something remarkable here, he said. Not many whistleblowers get the chance to implement the changes they fought for. I had help, I reminded him. You, Jordan Pierce, all the anonymous employees who sent evidence when it mattered most. True, but you were the catalyst. You asked the question no one else would ask. He glanced around the crowded room. How does it feel? Vindication, satisfaction. I considered the question carefully. Neither, really. It feels like purpose. like this is what I was meant to do all along. He nodded. The best revenge isn't destroying your enemies, it's building something better than they could imagine. As I mingled with shareholders and executives after the presentation, I felt none of the anxiety or anger that had consumed me a year ago. Instead, I felt a quiet confidence not just in myself, but in the possibility of meaningful change within even the most entrenched systems. They had fired me for asking one question too many, but that question had led to transformation for Helixor, for the industry, and for me. And I wasn't done asking questions yet.